Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Okay, guys. Hello. Hope you're doing well. Preemptive like mega projects, the insane plan to build a bridge to Ireland. I saw this in the comments of, was it the English Channel video? I don't know. One of you guys recommended this, and I'm definitely happy to watch this. I would have watched it already if I had already seen it in my own YouTube recommendations. Let's go.
It's a bridge with the potential to create a Celtic powerhouse, one that could span the Irish Sea and intertwine the economies of the British Isles to an extent that's never been seen before. To hear its proponents tell it, the Irish Sea Bridge, also known as the Celtic Crossing, would be a great leap forward for the economic relationship between Britain and Ireland. It would bring the countries far closer politically. It would offer travel and opportunity to the people of both nations, and although it would be a very impressive undertaking of engineering and design, it wouldn't actually be impossible. No, if it could be done, it had a very real chance to etch the names of its creators and its benefactors into history forever. So with a pitch like that, it's hard to believe that the Irish Sea Bridge has at present been entirely dismissed, somewhere between an economic pipe dream of the British Isles and a vanity project for the man-eating mop of hair formerly known as Boris Johnson. But the reality of the project is very different than what its most starry-eyed supporters would describe. So on today's episode of Mega Projects, we're going to go into the long-heralded Celtic Crossing, why it could exist, what it might look like, and why it might just all be a load of malarkey.
The main thing is, I'm assuming, like, how much demand is there for a road link between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom? I don't know. It seems like it might have just been too much trouble for its worth.
The concept of a sea link between Great Britain and Ireland certainly not a new one. The idea was first proposed in the late 19th century by industrialists and unionists who wanted a potentially crucial commercial and strategic route between the islands. At the time, both countries could have benefited greatly from the sea link, which was imagined as a tunnel at this time rather than a bridge. The concept resurfaced in 1915 during World War I, then again in the 1950s, then again in the 1980s, and then finally in the 2000s, always as a tunnel. But despite a whole range of feasibility studies, the sea link was eventually dismissed each time as a prohibitively expensive engineering project and one that was unlikely to provide enough economic benefit in the long run to justify its creation. In 1988, when the matter was brought up to the Irish Minister for Tourism and Transport, the minister noted that a sea tunnel between Ireland and Britain could cost double that of the Channel Tunnel between France and Britain, while getting about 20% of the usage. With so many attempts and so
I'd imagine this is longer than it would be, but maybe the rock it has to tunnel through for this bridge they're talking about would be like, maybe you'd have to go deeper or something.
France and Britain, while getting about 20% of the usage. With so many attempts and so many failures to even have a sea link attempted, it would be fair to wonder why the concept would be revived yet again in the 21st century, but the answer is, in many ways, more geopolitical than it is economical. The conversation was reinvigorated in 2018 amidst a period of open questions around the status of Britain as a cohesive nation-state, the role of Scotland in deciding its own future, and the complex historically fraught interrelations between Ireland, Britain, and Northern Ireland, which is a part of the UK despite its geographic location on the island of Ireland. In early 2018, the UK's then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson proposed the idea of building a bridge across the English Channel to provide a second link between England and France. Unfortunately, Johnson's imagined 22-mile-long bridge was promptly dismissed as being a little bit ridiculous, not just because it would require sticking a bridge in the middle of one of the world's busiest oceanic shipping lanes, but also because it would have been an extremely expensive solution to a problem that has already been solved with a quite famous undersea tunnel. Already well known for his affinity for large infrastructure projects and proposals, Johnson received quite a bit of blowback from industry experts in large-scale engineering. As one architect, Alan Dunlop, put it would be easier and more convenient to just move France closer. But Alan Dunlop in particular decided to take things one step further. As a direct alternative to the English-French Sea Bridge, which had by then come to be known as the Boris Bridge, Dunlop proposed a bridge across the Irish Sea, linking Scotland and Northern Ireland. Although the proposal might have been at least a bit tongue-in-cheek, Dunlop was careful to clarify exactly why he dismissed the Boris Bridge. As he told architecture magazine Deason, "I'm not against a bridge from England to France. It's not an either-or response. A bridge crossing the English Channel, which is one of the busiest shipping lanes, would be economically challenging. This is why I said it would cost less to move France closer, although I have no doubt it would be technically achievable. As Dunlop explains, a bridge between the UK and Ireland would provide a political and infrastructural counterweight to the UK government's heavy spending in London and the East Coast, while being up to 6 or 7 times cheaper, significantly more useful, and more mutually beneficial to both countries. Dunlop's proposal started to gain traction fairly quickly, especially from the Conservative Democratic Union.
Did I hear that right? So they're saying that at least you're spending money away from London, even if it's not worth it. That seems like sort of
Party of Northern Ireland, the DUP, which historically has advocated against Irish nationalism in favour of cultivating British and Protestant culture. The DUP quickly hopped on board the concept, supporting a crossing between Northern Ireland and Scotland, and they used their ties with Britain's Conservative Party to raise awareness of the project. It's not difficult to see why the DUP would have wanted such a crossing. After all, a direct road and rail route between Scotland and Northern Ireland would have the potential to intertwine the Northern Irish economy with Britain more thoroughly, while forcing Ireland to rely on its northern partner as an economic facilitator if it wanted to use the route. Now, just let me take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video who makes this all possible, and that is our wonderful longtime friends over at Squarespace. Look, maybe you're watching this video.
If you're interested, guys, please make sure to use the promo code link to the original video top of the description.
Much. And the only question then is that I have for you is, have you built your website with Squarespace? Do you need a website?
Yeah.
Website? Do you have a website? Because your website's probably clunky and old and weird and no one likes it. But if you went onto Squarespace, you'd fix it all up. Or maybe you need a new website. Maybe you're thinking about starting a business. I don't know. I'm not you. I know what I did. I used Squarespace to make my website, and it was incredibly easy using the drag and drop editor, which is now called the Fluid Engine, which is now even easier than it was before.
Show me the website,
a beautiful
you liar.
website, or a shop, or a portfolio, or whatever you want to do, and then you can connect. You remember back in the day, you'd make a website, you'd have to connect it with a domain, and you'd have to go somewhere else, like to, I don't know, again, I'm not supposed to mention competitors, but it would be like the big one that's maybe to do with dads, and you'd have to go there, then you'd have to connect things, and it would be incredibly complicated.
Home Depot?
Not with Squarespace. You make your website, and then you're like, yeah, I'd like a domain as well. And they're like, okay, done. Easy. It's super easy to get set up. You don't have to worry about anything. Your website looks beautiful. You drag and drop, you add your text, you add your images, you set up a store.
You guys can go forward if you'd like. It's
whatever
just,
you want. Plus, there's loads of extras.
I feel weird
like
watching other people's videos
email
and not
campaigns, which
playing
you could
their
pay a fortune
advertisements.
for
I just think
elsewhere
it's
if
right.
you're insane, or you could just use Squarespace. So look, when you're ready to get your amazing website, and I know it's going to be amazing because I know you're going to use Squarespace, all you need to do is go to squarespace.com/megaprojects and use the code megaprojects at checkout, and you'll save a fantastic 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, which is very nice. You're very welcome. And now back to today's video. By June of 2018, Boris Johnson himself agreed to seriously consider a sea bridge.
Yeah, this route right here, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't imagine that, like, I'm pretty sure this area of Scotland is not well populated at all. And in order to do this route, you'd have to go all the way down this peninsula. I mean, maybe make like another bridge right there, but still you'd have to go down to here. This seems much more reasonable.
And with more and more politicians from both Scotland and Northern Ireland giving their own support to the initiative, it began to seem like a realistic way to raise Britain's global profile while providing real economic benefits. The overall cost of the project was estimated to be somewhere around 15 or 20 billion pounds. Certainly not cheap, but low enough that the combination of indirect economic rewards and direct traffic tolls could pay it back before too long. And when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister just a little over a year later, the Irish Sea Bridge became a concept that even its biggest critics had to begin to take seriously. So, with the Celtic crossing looking more and more politically feasible in the UK, the next big question was how and where to actually build the thing. Historically, there are 4 proposed routes to cross the Irish Sea, each with its own advantages and drawbacks to consider. 2 of them connect with the country of Ireland and were not considered by the Johnson government, but the Irish Mail route, a 81-kilometre path from Dublin to Anglesey, Wales, deserves at least a mention, since despite its length, the rather shallow depth of the seafloor is less than 100 metres all the way through, making it potentially easier than either method we're about to discuss. In terms of a bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland, Alan Dunlop's proposal suggested 2 routes. One that would allow bridge construction for the shortest overall distance, and one to provide a more practical but more costly solution. The short route, a 20-kilometre or 12-mile crossing that would run between the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland and Tor Head, Northern Ireland, would minimise the amount of Irish sea bridge that actually needs to be built. But that route had some fairly significant problems. The Mull of Kintyre is a basically uninhabited headland on the very sparsely populated peninsula of Kintyre, several hours' drive from the nearest economically relevant city in Scotland. Tor Head in Northern Ireland is similarly remote, meaning that if a crossing were to be done here, it would, in practical terms, be connecting the middle of nowhere with the middle of nowhere. The British government wouldn't just be building a bridge, they would be building long, expensive roads and railways just to get to the bridge, with no local infrastructure to support travellers on their journey. A somewhat more realistic option is the Galloway route, a 45-kilometre or 28-mile route running from Portpatrick, Scotland to Larne, Northern Ireland. This route is a whole lot easier to work with. Larne is a fairly large town located just a half-hour's drive from Belfast, and though Portpatrick is 2 hours' drive from Glasgow and 3 from Edinburgh, it's at least inhabited, which is more than we could say for the short route. In 2010, the cost of a similar crossing was estimated at being under £20.5 billion. It's been a favourite of Northern Irish political parties, and despite its length...
Which means like 80 billion. Any construction estimate just times it by 3 or 4.
Sea crossings of this size have been accomplished using bridges in the past. The real problem at the Galloway route, also called the Portpatrick-Larne route, is Beauford's Dyke, a massive undersea trench that would be unavoidable when building on this location. The dike is deep enough to cause some real issues, with a maximum depth of 300 meters, roughly 1,000 feet. But it's not just the depth that's a problem. Far worse is the fact that after World War II, Beaufort Dyke was where the British Ministry of Defence chose to dump roughly 1 million tons of unexploded munitions, which aren't likely to stay unexploded for long if they were to get, say, a bridge support structure dropped on top of them. The presence of radioactive material as part of what the Ministry of Defence dumped into the trench doesn't really help matters very much either. Alan Dunlop and other bridge proponents
That actually helps me with the word dike. That, like, watching certain castle videos or construction videos, I was never quite sure, but it used the word to describe a trench. So the dike in some sort of construction is like, a trough.
Suggested that the deepest and most explosive-laden parts of the dike could be avoided. But even if they can't, there's a real possibility that the problem could be dealt with by using a pontoon bridge, also known as a floating bridge. In modern times, only about 20 permanent floating road bridges have been built, but the technology has been used on sea crossings in the past. On a bridge like this, support structures don't run all the way to the ground, but instead float at or beneath the surface of the water, relying instead on cables to secure the bridge to the seafloor. This technique has been used in oil rigs and could conceivably be used here. And there are other ways to go about the depth issue too. A tall cable-stayed or suspension bridge could support itself with relatively few towers, meaning that relatively few towers would have to be built from the seabed or supported on small artificial islands, which themselves would have to be created. Or, as engineer Ian Firth explained to National Geographic, the tunnel itself could be put underwater but not underground in a submerged tube that could either be tethered to floating pontoons on the surface or tethered to the seafloor, or both. But each option comes with its own drawbacks, each enough to at least raise questions about whether such an approach is even feasible. A floating bridge design would have to compensate for the rough Irish Sea, where harsh weather conditions and ocean currents would either require the bridge to be designed with flexibility in mind or structurally reinforced enough to resist the battering ocean. A submerged tunnel would mitigate the problems with surface weather, and it would have no risk of obstructing surface vessels, but would still struggle to deal with the undersea currents and would pose a major risk of flooding or fatalities from other accidents. And any approach using towers that do touch the sea floor greatly increases the risk of hitting that ordnance that could well have drifted into unexpected positions since it was dumped nearly a century ago. Perhaps most difficult of all, the Celtic crossing would require the winning design concept to be built on a scale that hasn't been attempted before, especially in the case of an undersea tunnel. And the drawbacks and considerations of each design sends the costs of the whole thing through the roof, no matter which direction the Johnson government might have chosen. The Øresund Bridge between Sweden and Denmark has been touted by the Irish Sea Bridge supporters as proof of concept. But not only is the bridge far shorter than even the shortest option in the Irish Sea, but it's built entirely on a route no deeper than 10 meters under the sea, making it less of an example of an easily replicated success and more of a reminder of the many conditions that would make the Irish Sea Bridge more costly, more dangerous, and infinitely more complicated than the Orison Bridge ever was. So, on February the 10th, 2020, Downing Street announced to the public that now Prime Minister Johnson's administration was carrying out feasibility studies related to the Celtic crossing. By now, the Johnson administration had settled on the longer but more well-populated southern route, and Johnson himself had touted the plan as part of his broader approach to Brexit, which had just taken place a few days prior to Downing Street's announcement. At the same time, the announcement was taken with a mix of the same public skepticism that the Celtic crossing had been generating for years now, and a new sense of dread over the idea that Johnson, now playing with the entire British budget as PM, might actually give the construction project the old college try. But before long, the project began to garner more and more pointed critiques from local officials in the areas where the bridge was to be built. Not only did locals on either side of the Irish Sea point out just how horrific the crossing would be in rough weather, so bad that it might necessitate frequent closures of the bridge if it were built, but they also raised questions about how
The
exactly
Irish Sea
the
is that bad, huh? I know the North Sea is pretty famous for being rough, but for some reason I thought that the Irish Sea might behave more like a giant harbor that's like closed around by Britain and Ireland. But I mean, it's pretty large, so I know that it'll act more open ocean-like. So interesting.
had come to believe
I'm more curious about that,
bridge if it were
why
built,
it's so rough.
but they also raised questions about how exactly the government had come to believe that the road infrastructure on either side was equipped to handle the demands of construction or the volume of expected motorists. One Scottish activist, Catherine Branson, kindly pointed out that Portpatrick, one of the projected endpoints of the bridge, didn't even have a two-lane road leading to the local ferry terminal. Other locals on both sides of the strait explained to the public that those pesky old munitions, allegedly buried in Beaufort's Dyke, had a nasty habit of washing ashore on the beaches with astonishing regularity. With all that in mind, it's probably best that the Johnson government's feasibility study, released in November 2021, found the Celtic crossing to be an order of magnitude more expensive than Johnson, Dunlop, and others had previously suggested.
Shocker.
If the crossing were to be done...
Oh my god. A construction project was more expensive than initially thought. Sorry, I'm just still butthurt from the bridge in my hometown when I was a kid that took like a decade.
By tunnel, the study found, it would run up a price tag of £205 billion, and the required depth of the tunnel, which could only be reached on limited gradients in order to prevent trains from derailing, would make it the longest undersea tunnel ever built. It would also have to do without a road component, which could not be considered feasible for safety reasons. A bridge would be even more expensive, £335 billion, and it too would have been the longest bridge in history. Both projects would have to come complete with massive infrastructure updates in the Scottish and North Irish areas where they came back to land. And even if the crossing was seamlessly approved through the British legislature and funded without issues or cost overruns, a best case scenario would see the Celtic crossing opening 30 years from now.
I want to know, like, with all this stuff and the crazy price tag and the giant records it would break if it were ever built, either as a tunnel or a bridge, is it how many people like are really troubled or like it's really inconvenient not having a bridge? Like, how many British people are there that are like, oh god, we need this so bad, need it bad enough that you would like go on this, never done before kind of adventure to build it?
Were nothing short of catastrophic for the proponents of the Irish Sea Bridge. Even despite the project's potential to transform the British Isles, there was absolutely no way that it could pay for itself within its creators' lifetimes, and some of those same creators might not even live to see it finished. The bridge would have undoubtedly caused uproar in Parliament, and given the awful conditions present in the Irish Sea during some parts of the year, it seems utterly unreasonable to assume that the project would proceed on a best-case timeline. Some of the bridge's advocates, most prominently Alan Dunlop, expressed confusion on how the crossing's costs could have been assessed at £200 billion rather than £20 billion, but the damage was already done. The project was technically possible, but in a much more realistic sense, there was no way in hell that it could ever get done. With such a crystal clear conclusion, Boris Johnson and his ministers had no choice but to accept the result and let go of the dream of an Irish sea bridge for good. He took an additional shellacking when the Department of Transport announced that the study alone had cost the British taxpayer nearly £1 million. So there lies the Irish Sea Bridge, condemned once and for all as a pipe dream with little chance of being resuscitated in the future. With the stunning demands of the project now put on full display, it's unlikely that future administrations will have any interest in wedding themselves to a known political laughingstock. Without that sort of government interest, and without any other source willing to pour 3 times Bill Gates' net worth into a functionally doomed project, the Celtic Crossing appears to have passed into the graveyard of mega projects that will never be.
It does seem to be less so, or at least like not fully something that would really help, like that they need to build as like something to really help everyone, and a lot of it just seems to be tied to politics. And it's not like this amazing, like, oh my God, Britain is connected to Europe through the Channel Tunnel. I'm still flabbergasted as to why this was pursued so much in the first place. It seems to be like some sort of, political thing, like Simon in the video hinted at. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any videos. Any recommendations would be nice. Or any comments down below. Would appreciate it. Would love if you liked and subscribed. And I'm first video of the day. I'm still kind of waking up, but that was nice. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.